It is with an incredibly heavy heart that I have to share the devastating update that Shelton Bennett, the 28-year-old father who disappeared 2 years ago in the town of Laurel Hill, North Carolina, has now been officially confirmed as deceased. According to officials, his body was recently recovered after an extensive search effort, marking a heartbreaking end to a case that many had still been holding out hope for. But while the details surrounding the discovery remain limited, the confirmation alone has sent shockwaves throughout his local community, especially given the recent arrest of Frederick Deshawn Moore, who has since been charged with his murder. However, the circumstances are already raising more questions than answers as to why this tragic event ever happened and if anybody else was involved. So investigators have made it clear that they are treating this case with the utmost seriousness. But as shocking as this update is, Shelton's story is not the only one that demands our attention today, as there have also been significant and equally troubling developments in other cases that I've covered over the years, such as the case of Sade Robinson and Kevin McGrath. So in this video, I'll walk you through what we know so far about the Shelton Bennett case, as well as how this devastating news connects to the broader pattern of missing people across the United States. Because behind every headline is a real person whose life mattered, and behind every delay in justice is a family still waiting for answers. So without further ado, let's get into the first case. Shelton Eugene Bennett was born in 1995 in Scotland County, North Carolina, where he grew up surrounded by a loving family in the close-knit community of Laurel Hill. Known for his upbeat and loyal nature, Shelton was someone who brought joy to those around him, and his infectious smile left a lasting impression on everyone he met. Family was everything to Shelton. His mother, Jennifer, often described him as a devoted son and father who prioritized his loved ones above all else. Most notably, Shelton adored his young child, and his role as a father was at the heart of everything he did. Whether it was spending quality time at home or offering support to his friends, Shelton's reliability and compassion were unwavering. But on top of this, beyond his deep connection to his family, Shelton was also a man of many talents and ambitions. He worked hard to provide for his loved ones, balancing responsibilities with a forward-looking attitude. His friends and family often spoke of his ability to stay focused on his goals, even when life presented challenges. However, like so many others, Shelton did carry a few burdens which he kept private. But despite these personal struggles, he was always there for the people closest to him, especially his child, whose happiness meant everything. So, towards the end of summer in 2023, Shelton was actively making plans for the future, with every intention of continuing to be a positive force in his family's life. But tragically, these plans would inevitably be cut short when Shelton would mysteriously disappear on that fateful day in August. On Thursday, the 24th of August, the 28-year-old father was having a conversation with his mother over text, where he revealed his plans to visit a friend in the nearby town of Savannah. According to Jennifer, he seemed his usual self, calm, collected, and optimistic about the day ahead. Nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. But what unfolded in the hours that followed would remain shrouded in mystery, as by the next day, his friends had grown extremely concerned when calls to Shelton went unanswered, an unusual occurrence for someone so connected to his family and community. One close friend was so worried that he eventually decided to visit Shelton's home to check on him, only to be met with some incredibly suspicious behaviour from Shelton's partner, who claimed she hadn't seen him that day and had no idea where he could be. So, given the lack of concrete evidence, Shelton's friend was forced to leave the residence, despite his strong suspicion that there was much more to the story that she was keeping a secret. But to make matters even more concerning, 3 days later, on August the 28th, Shelton's blue Dodge Challenger was discovered abandoned on Butler Road, a desolate and rural area in Laurel Hill, North Carolina. However, given the lack of evidence present at the time, the vehicle had not yet been identified as belonging to Shelton. According to reports, the car was intact but offered no clues about who owned the vehicle, as they discovered no personal belongings, no signs of a struggle, or nothing to suggest what had really happened. It was as if the driver had simply vanished into thin air. So as the days continued to pass by, Shelton's family were forced to confront the chilling reality that Shelton Bennett, a devoted father and beloved son, was potentially in danger. And so they had no choice but to turn to the local police to officially report him as missing. On Tuesday the 29th of August, the Scotland County Sheriff's Office received a call from Shelton Bennett's deeply concerned family, who were claiming that they had not seen or heard from their loved one in several days. So in response to their pleas for help, the investigating officers immediately opened a missing person case and began gathering information from those closest to Shelton. Through their inquiries, investigators learned that his car was an exact match to the blue Dodge Challenger that had been discovered abandoned on a remote stretch of Butler Road just a day earlier, and this discovery sent shockwaves throughout the family as the location was far from anywhere Shelton was known to frequent. The sheriff's office then worked to piece together Shelton's last known movements, speaking with friends, family and associates, and it wasn't long before suspicions arose surrounding certain individuals connected to Shelton. Two women close to him who withheld critical information reportedly declined to cooperate fully with authorities, raising questions about what they may have been hiding. Family members also claimed that these women seemed unbothered by Shelton's sudden disappearance, which they found unsettling given the seriousness of the situation. However, despite these early developments, the case would only grow more troubling as days turned into weeks, with Shelton's family working tirelessly to raise awareness with no definitive leads emerging, eventually leading the case to turn cold as the police awaited further evidence to come forward. And then, exactly a week later, their patience would finally seem to pay off, as a credible tip would come forward that could have potentially changed everything. On Tuesday the 5th of September, nearly 2 weeks after Shelton Bennett was last seen, investigators once again turned their attention to Shelton's partner, as well as the other woman who was apparently a part of his life as well. During the initial interviews, their behaviour had raised significant red flags as both had reportedly refused to cooperate fully with authorities, but according to Shelton's family, these women may have been some of the last people to see him alive, making their lack of cooperation all the more suspicious. However, due to the police's initial hesitation, it took weeks for investigators to begin piecing together timelines and evidence that may have led back to the suspects. So by the time law enforcement could act more decisively, many felt that critical time had already been lost. In one instance, investigators reportedly visited one of the women's properties to conduct a thorough search, and during their time in the residence, they combed through her home, questioned her about Shelton's last known movement, and examined any potential evidence that could have linked her to the case. However, the search didn't seem to yield immediate results, and it raised more questions than answers about what might have happened to Shelton and why these individuals seemed so reluctant to help. So it was no surprise that the delay in conducting these searches and interviews drew sharp criticism from Shelton's family, as they voiced concerns that valuable evidence may have been overlooked or destroyed in the time since Shelton went missing, potentially allowing those involved to cover their tracks. For Shelton's loved ones, the thought that someone might have had over 2 weeks to erase all traces of wrongdoing was a bitter pill to swallow, and as months continued to pass with no concrete evidence to tie anyone to Shelton's disappearance, law enforcement continued to lean on the public for tips and information. But sadly, every lead seemed to hit a dead end, leaving the case in limbo. So for years, Shelton Bennett remained a missing person, with his family desperately waiting for answers that would never seem to come. However, just when it seemed like the case would never get solved, there would be a sudden and tragic update that nobody could have been prepared for. On Friday the 1st of August, in the year 2025, almost 2 years after Shelton would mysteriously disappear, the skeletal remains of a man were discovered on a vacant farm in the Adamsville area of Marlborough County, South Carolina, as a lone worker mowed the overgrown field. Nearly a week later, on August 7th, officials confirmed that the remains belonged to Shelton Bennett, and that they were apparently located only 15 minutes away from where he disappeared. The identification of the remains were the result of a coordinated multi-agency effort, including the Marlborough County Coroner's Office, the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, the South Carolina Deputy Coroner's Office, the Scotland County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, plus support from law enforcement teams in Anson, Cumberland, and Richmond counties. But despite the incredible efforts of everyone involved, no amount of discovery would be able to fill the hole that was left for Shelton's family, who were left dejected and heartbroken as they questioned who was responsible and what could have happened to their loved one. However, they wouldn't have to wait too much longer for an update, as just later that same day, an arrest warrant was issued for a 33-year-old man that was supposedly an acquaintance of Shelton's, named Frederick Deshawn Moore, who was then charged with first-degree murder in connection to Shelton's death. The suspect was then taken into custody and denied bond before being locked up in the Scotland County Detention Centre as he awaits a trial date to be set. In the words of Captain Earl Hayward of the Scotland County Sheriff's Office, "Everybody has a motive, everybody has an intent, you've just got to put them all together." Reflecting on the profound time and emotional investment, Hayward added, "I've kept this case with me the entire time that I've worked on it. The case file is a thick file, but I've kept it with me the entire time. We went everywhere on this case and followed the leads on it." However, although this discovery confirms the tragic fate of Shelton Bennett, giving his family at least some of the answers they were waiting for, the truth is there are still many painful questions that remain, including how he was killed and why this supposed friend of Shelton's would carry out such a horrific act. But as authorities continue to piece together the final chapter of Shelton's story, there are still many other cases out there that are still waiting to be solved once and for all, such as the case of Sade Robinson. On Monday the 1st of April in 2024, a 19-year-old college student named Sade Robinson was spotted walking along North Commerce Street in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as she had secretly planned to meet an older man for a date. It is unknown how the two first crossed paths, whether that be through online dating or simply meeting in person, but either way, she was reported missing later that day by her family after she failed to show up for her scheduled shift at the Pizza Shuttle restaurant. The next morning, Sade's car was found on fire in an alleyway approximately 2 miles from where she was last seen, and then later that same day, a severed human leg was discovered at Warnemont Park by Lake Michigan. The case was then escalated to a possible homicide, and potential suspects were immediately brought in for questioning, including a local man named Maxwell Anderson, after blood was discovered on the stairwell of his home, and it was reported that he may have had contact with Sade in the days building up to her disappearance. And soon after, it was revealed that the blood did in fact belong to Sade, as well as the body parts that had been found scattered around the city. So with this heartbreaking update in the case, Maxwell was being held on a $500,000 bail where he was set to stand before a judge for his preliminary hearing to decide if he would be convicted for the crime. During the trial, prosecutors laid out a disturbing timeline of Sade's final hours. They told the jury that on the night of April 1st, Sade met Maxwell Anderson for dinner and drinks before heading back to his home, with surveillance footage and cell phone data placing her entering his residence but never coming out. From there, investigators say Anderson used Sade's own car to drive across the city in the early hours of April 2nd, a journey that ultimately led to Warnemont Park, where the severed leg belonging to Sade was found later that same day. Prosecutors also revealed that her DNA was discovered not just on the stairwell of Anderson's home, but on a plaid jacket inside his closet, further tying him to the crime scene. Anderson's defense tried to cast doubt, arguing that there was no conclusive evidence proving exactly how Sade was killed, but when the trial began in late May of 2025, the weight of the prosecution's evidence, from forensic analysis to digital tracking, painted a chilling picture. Jurors were even shown disturbing images found on Anderson's phone, which one later described as a trophy of the crime. So with all of this damning evidence in mind, it took the jury less than an hour to reach their decision, and on June 6, 2025, Maxwell Anderson was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, as well as arson. He was originally set to be sentenced on August 15th, but the date was moved up to August 1st, and on that day, Judge Laura Crivello handed down the maximum penalty allowed by law: life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with additional time for the dismemberment and arson charges. For Sade's loved ones, it was a bittersweet moment, as while they finally had the certainty of a conviction and the knowledge that Anderson would never walk free again, it could never undo the horrific loss that they had suffered. And even now, the legal chapter still isn't entirely closed, as Anderson's legal team has already begun the appeals process, meaning this case could continue to wind its way through the courts for years to come. But regardless of what happens next, the facts remain the same. Sade Robinson's life was stolen in an act of calculated brutality, and justice, while long awaited, has now been served. A conclusion that unfortunately continues to elude the family of a man named Kevin McGrath, who still remains missing to this day, with his mystery only deepening over the years. On Monday the 4th of September in 2023, a 26-year-old man named Kevin McGrath was aboard a Carnival cruise ship in Florida when he would mysteriously disappear. He was last seen in his cabin at approximately 2 a.m. by his brother Andre. However, this was the last time anybody would see the young father of two. After an extensive search was carried out on the cruise ship, Kevin was still nowhere to be found, so his family officially reported him missing to the Miami-Dade police later that day. They then conducted a broader search in the surrounding waters, working together with the Coast Guard, but despite the efforts of everybody involved, there was still no sign of Kevin. Camera footage was also checked to find out where Kevin went that night, but rather hauntingly, there was absolutely no evidence of the man going overboard, leading many to wonder what really happened. However, the story would be far from over, as investigators and Kevin's family refused to let this mystery fade into obscurity. Despite the ship being fitted with overboard detection systems and monitored by extensive surveillance cameras, there was absolutely no indication that Kevin ever went into the water, and yet there was also no record of him disembarking the vessel when it docked in Miami later that morning. Authorities with the Miami-Dade Police Department, the US Coast Guard and port officials conducted exhaustive searches, both on the ship and in the surrounding waters, but every sweep came up empty. Not a single belonging, no clothing, no trace of Kevin was ever recovered, and for his family, the lack of answers was nothing short of torment. Kevin's loved ones have repeatedly described the heartbreak of living in limbo, waking up each day not knowing if he's alive, if he's hurt, or if he's gone forever. His young daughters have been left without their father, and his relatives have been forced to hold on to hope in the absence of any real closure. In the midst of the investigation, it also emerged that Kevin had been on supervised probation at the time of the cruise, something that added a new layer of complexity to the case. But even with that detail in mind, nothing could explain how a man could disappear from a ship filled with hundreds of passengers, which was monitored 24/7, without anyone seeing or hearing a thing. However, despite the wealth of evidence that has mounted in this case, nearly 2 years on, the mystery remains just as baffling as it was on day one. No one has been able to say with certainty what happened to Kevin McGrath that night, so until answers are found, his family continues to plead for anyone with information to come forward. Now, when you take a step back and look at these three cases side by side, a chilling pattern begins to emerge. Not in the exact details, but in the heartbreaking truth that runs through all of them. In the case of Shelton Bennett, a young man's life was cut short and his body left to decay in an overgrown field, with investigators now facing the daunting task of piecing together the final hours that led to his murder. For Sade Robinson, the horror was immediate and undeniable. A brutal killing followed by dismemberment, with her last moments spent in the company of a man who saw her as nothing more than an object to be disposed of. And then there's Kevin McGrath, whose disappearance aboard a cruise ship remains an open wound for his family. A mystery with no clear ending, no confirmed crime scene, and no answers at all to explain how a father of two could simply vanish without a trace. Each story is unique in its circumstances, but they all share the same core tragedy. Someone's loved one is gone, taken from this world in ways that defy logic, and leave behind a trail of grief. They also share another harsh reality, that justice, even when it comes, is never enough to fill the hole that's left behind. For Shelton's family, the arrest brings no relief until a conviction is secured, and for Sade's loved ones, even a life sentence can't undo the nightmare of what happened. But for Kevin's relatives, the hardest part is that the fight is still ongoing, because until the day they get answers, the story will always end with a question mark. So while the facts of each case may differ, the message they leave us with is the same. These were real people with families, friends, dreams, and futures, all stolen far too soon. So the least we can do is keep telling their stories, keep their names alive, and keep pushing until the truth is found and justice is served. But with that being said, thank you so much for staying to the end of this video, and feel free to check out the playlist on screen now for more stories like these. Without your support, the videos wouldn't have the impact that they do, so please leave your thoughts, condolences and theories in the comments, and if you found this video informative, consider liking and subscribing to help support the channel. But anyway, until next time, please stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.